Hey guys, I got another RPG horror story compilation for you. The first story is going to be about how a party ignored a player, until they didn't, because they just wanted an item. Lately, I've been thinking about a campaign that I briefly played in, and I think it's been long enough that I can share my story. The campaign was on Roll20, with the DM being my roommate, and the other players being friends of his. My roommate was actually the one who got me into D&D, and I want to stress that he's in no way, shape, or form a part of the horror. He is an excellent DM and friend, and I have to give him credit where credit is due. My first ever campaign with him was by far my most memorable and satisfying. But I should probably preface the story by stating that between my first campaign and this one, I came to the realization that I'm transgender, which, as you might expect, caused a lot of turbulence in my life around this time. I'm not stating this as an excuse by any means, but it does give some context to the story itself and why I felt the way I did about certain things that had happened. In any case, my roommate asked if I wanted to play a Roll20 campaign with him and his out-of-state friends. I decided to play a satyr druid named Freyalise, who went by Elise to most people. It was also my second campaign ever playing as a woman, both in and out of character. The first time, which was in a different campaign, didn't end so well, but admittedly, a fair bit of the blame was my own for that one. But that's a different story in of itself. Our first session rolled around, and I introduced myself with female pronouns and my character, complete with a feminine satyr avatar. Now, here's the thing. I am fully and painfully aware of the fact that I don't sound particularly feminine, and I am also aware of the fact that this is going to cause people to misgender me. For this reason, I try to be polite and brief when I correct people. I don't even correct people every time, because I don't want to sound repetitive or obsessive. The only thing I ask of people I spend time around is that they at least try to make an effort. I will never ever get mad at someone for saying he, oops, I mean she, because that shows that they're at least trying. But I didn't even get that from this group, not one time. I asked the DM if his friends would be cool with playing with a trans person, and he said yes. But I guess cool, in this case, ignore instead of viscerally hate, because that was my experience. My attempts to correct people went ignored every single time, and I was exclusively referred to as he. Even my character was referenced as this guy, despite the fact that my character's feminine name and avatar were on screen in front of them the whole time. In fact, after the first time I corrected someone, I noticed that the group didn't really seem to acknowledge my presence at all, unless an NPC did. And this went on for about 6 hours across 2 sessions, before the incident that made me leave the game. We had just finished clearing a local mine from an undead infestation, and had been presented with our loot before we decided to take a short break. The DM left the chat for a bit while we discussed the goggles of night that we found. To set this up a bit, my character had lived in the forest their entire life, and knew very little of the outside world. And one of the PCs was a monk with a notably low intelligence score, and would frequently roll to see if he knew what people were talking about. In any case, the monk was talking up about how useful these goggles would be for him, and I figured that if one of us should get dark vision, it should probably be the melee fighter. But suddenly he started specifying how much further he would be able to see. So I asked if he already had night vision, and he did. So I brought up the fact that my character didn't have it at all, and that it would probably be more helpful if I, the only character in the party who didn't have night vision, have it. Even if I am a caster and not melee, I still need to be able to see who I'm slinging spells at. Suddenly, the monk got very possessive of these goggles out of nowhere. First, arguing why he should have them more, and then beginning to ask questions like, well, does your character even know what these things do? To which I retorted, does yours? You're the one that keeps insisting on rolling to see if you even know what people around you are talking about. And right after I say this, the DM comes back in and says that he's not going to tolerate arguing over loot. The monk immediately changed his tune and said, you know what? I'm over this. You can have them. Which ended up making me look like the one who was coveting the loot, which wasn't my intention at all. At this point, I was done with this group, and I go into shutdown mode. Meaning any interest that I had in this was dead, and I didn't want to continue for another second. If it was anyone else DMing, I would have logged out of Roll20 right then and there, but I stayed in it for another hour or so, and just didn't say a word. I admit now that neither of these courses of action, leaving or shutting down, would have been appropriate. I should have addressed my issues with the group, both the misgendering and the loot issue, right then and there, but instead, I gave the group the cold shoulder for the rest of the session, and quit the campaign afterwards. In any case, I just mostly wanted to get the story off of my chest, and hopefully off of my mind as well. I don't think anyone in the group is a bad person or anything like that. It was just a situation that we all could have handled better. Well guys, even if this DM can tell a good story and whatnot, he was seemingly taciturn and complacent with the misgendering by the rest of his friends. And he also ended the loot argument, but he never resolved the underlying issue. Not that that's something that really matters, if it was going to be reoccurring, as the OP left. Just because as the DM you end an argument, doesn't mean that it has been resolved and will not come up again. You have to find resolutions to these things where everyone can be happy, or you might end up needing to be taking someone out. Well guys, that's the end of the first story. We're gonna go on to the second one, which is about a DM that only gave out cursed items. This was some years ago in 4th edition. We were running a campaign mostly through the Underdark, with 4 players and the DM, and we were around level 8 or 10. Overall, the campaign was good. However, the distribution of magic items was not. The DM had a fixation on making any magic item dropped be cursed. And they weren't just mild curses. They were debilitating and deadly ones. Our first item was an axe, and when our teammate picked it up, he had to roll a will saving throw, with a DC beyond what a 20 would grant. And when he failed, he immediately began attacking his teammates in a bloodthirsty rage. He was immune to all status effects, which we found out the hard way when we attempted to paralyze or sleep him. There was no save, and no solution. We were only able to get him to stop attacking after killing the character, as even his unconscious body fought us. The next item was a small ring, in an unassuming chest, buried in rock on a small underground island. Activating the ring turned you into stone permanently. And I should also mention that we didn't have a cleric with us. But even so, I don't remember how easily they can deal with status effects in 4th. Our last item was an amulet that I was forced to activate via a will save. It summoned a skeleton that immediately turned around and attacked me. It wasn't very dangerous, so we experimented a bit. It wasn't useful in combat, because as best as we could figure, all the amulet did was summon a skeleton that attacked the person who summoned it. And at this point, we just stopped picking up items. We hadn't, so far, found anything that was a net boon for the group. All of the items that we found seemed to want to kill us in some manner or way. So we, as a group, opted not to take any more items from this cursed place. We bypassed several items, and the DM even went out of his way to describe their opulence and divine wonder, and one of them was a chalice. But we wouldn't have it. Careful, boys! The more extravagant the item, the more horrible the curse. A halberd, a magic book, suits of armor, all radiating magic, and all ignored. After about 3 or 4 sessions, the DM began canceling on us. Sometimes the day of. And after a month, we began asking about the campaign. And he informed us that he would no longer be DMing for us. Because none of us were interested in the world he had crafted. Despite the fact that we enjoyed everything besides the cursed items. But this wasn't enough. By passing on his cursed items, and he did eventually admit that all the other items were also cursed, as he couldn't help but share a couple, we were obviously not interested in anything about his campaign, and he stopped running it. Even now, when I share details about the campaign that I'm currently running, he always feels I could spice it up with a couple of cursed items for my players. Like the two-handed axe that fuses with your hands so you can do nothing with them besides hack and chop. Well guys, I don't really quite know what to say on this guy. It kinda sucks that he could apparently DM, but he had such a fixation on making these cursed items and whatnot. I don't know. Did he think that cursed items would be fun when you have to kill a fellow player's character? Did he think it would be dramatic? I don't quite know what he was expecting here. Once or twice it might be a little fun or, different, but when you constantly putting them in to the point where your players are actively avoiding picking up anything, and then you later on admitting that yes, in fact, all those things were also cursed, you might need to tone it down a little bit. If you really, really want to have creativity with making cursed items and whatnot, that's fine. But don't shove them all into your campaign. Go write a blog or something. Alright guys, that's the end of the second story. Now we're moving on to the third story, which is about how the OP ruined his own game from his alcoholism. So, this takes place a couple of months ago, and one of my friends, Pep, who I've known forever, invited me to his Roll20 D&D group to join one of their games. It fizzled out after a few sessions because Pep was running too many a week, and was getting burned out. I had a World of Darkness campaign on the back burner that I wanted to try and run, and the players in that group were interested, so they made characters and we got into it. And I proceeded to run a train wreck of a game. I'd have a bottle of liquor on hand to help with my social anxiety, and the plan was always to only have a few shots to ease my nerves. But it always ended up the whole bottle every session. This would result in me being obnoxious, throwing in last-minute plot hooks that seemed cool when I was drunk, but then I'd forget what I made, so they would become plot holes, and pretty much just forgetting the second half of each session and having to ask Pep what had happened. And points in each session where I would have no idea what was currently happening and would have to ask multiple times. Pep had a few talks with me about it, and I always said that I wouldn't let it be a problem again, but nothing ever changed. Finally, he said that he was going to be leaving the game because he was concerned for me, with all of the other players following suit, and I don't blame them at all. I'm embarrassed about it every time I think about it, but I saw this subreddit today and thought it would be a good place to post the story. Don't drink in DM. Also, if anyone is wondering, no, I don't drink like that anymore. I still have some beers occasionally, but I don't drink liquor anymore because I've realized that I can't control myself around it. Thanks for getting this far, and let it be a lesson to anyone who's thinking of drinking while running a game. And to add to this, as a couple of people have pointed out, drinking in of itself is not a problem, as long as you can do it responsibly. Well guys, at least the OP is willing to admit his own faults here, unlike so many other bad DMs. And not only did he admit his own faults, he also more or less fixed his alcohol problem. Going from drinking an entire bottle of liquor every time to only a couple of beers, I would say is a pretty successful move from where he was. Hopefully this means that he also got his social anxiety helped out a bit. Well, that's the end of the third story. The next one up is about a DM who decided that a time skip was the bestest idea ever. I'd been playing a pay-to-play game on Roll20 for about 8 months, and for the first 6, it It was really good. But for the past 2 months, it's been a solid 8 sessions of combat, and I had repeatedly expressed that I didn't want to be paying to just say, "I move forward and attack," every 20 minutes. And the DM had promised that, when we finished the current dungeon, the game would get back to narrative storytelling instead of combat, so I stuck with it. Now, a thing to know about my character, he was a kobold trying to get his tribe into civilization. He was the hero his people could hold up and say, "See, we can be like him. Give us a chance." And over the 8 months of sessions, we had done a lot of character building for him to get his tribe, which was an enclave in Waterdeep, to establish trade relations with marginally civilized humanoids. And then, when we finished the dungeon, we got back to find that there had been a 25-year skip forward. And in that time, the DM had told us that the bad guys had cloned my character and used the clone to kill the elders of his tribe, and lead that tribe in an uprising against Waterdeep, and then enslave them to Tiamat's forces. Apparently, the DM thought it was a cool plot point that Tiamat's forces had spent those kinds of resources on taking over a particular kobold tribe. But the ridiculousness of the premise was nothing compared to what it meant for my character. With an off-screen handwave of a time skip, literally everything about the character that I love was thrown in the garbage. One doesn't get a second chance to join civilization after that. The tribe was functionally gone, and the DM cheerfully phrased it as, "Now you get to rebuild your tribe, isn't that cool?" So, I left the game. My only regret was sticking it out for the 2 months of solid combat, where I wasn't having fun. If a paid DM promises to fix a problem, and that problem isn't fixed the next session, it's not going to. Alright, well, that's the end of the 4th story. The 5th one is going to be about that guy in training. I'm still a little frustrated about this, so I'm going to vent a little bit here. Also, there's a little bit of Dragon Heist spoilers. So, I'm DMing Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and I told everyone beforehand that we would be trying it for a game with a little bit more RP, as most of our games had been mostly combat-based, and everyone said that they would like to try that. Now, for a little bit of background on the problem player, he decided to play a chaotic, neutral Kenku monk, even though I said that we were running Dragon Heist. I thought that maybe he had a plan for being able to RP with Kenku, but he never did anything even when I tried to involve him directly. He was basically that guy in training. Let's call him Doug. So, we had been going for a bit, and we finally hit level 4 last session, and the players were going to go down in Grinda Garlos Apparatus of Qualish, in search of treasure, and I modified it to be able to hold the whole party, as I thought that would be more fun. The players were down at the bottom of the harbor, and a huge shark attacked. The Water Genasi fighter and Dragonborn warlock went out of the apparatus by using control water to keep the water from rushing in when the back opened, while the rogue and Doug stayed inside. The rogue was using the claws to attack while Doug did nothing. He could have attacked with the claws on his turn too, but he wouldn't for some reason. He would just sit there every turn, complaining that I nerfed his class. Eventually, on one of his turns when Doug kept complaining that his class was useless, and so on and so forth, I had had enough, so I told him to stop complaining about everything that would happen, and then he freaked out about how no one at the table was having fun, and that no one wanted to play an RP-heavy game. To which the rest of the players said that they were having fun, and that he shouldn't talk for them. Doug then insisted to the players that they weren't, in fact, having fun, and that I was a garbage DM, and then he quit the game. Thank God. And to add one final note, by nerf his class, the Kenku meant that he was a monk who couldn't swim, and had no ranged weapons. That's the end of that story. We're going to be moving on to the last one, which is about the A word. No, not that one. I mean autism. When I was in university, I joined the local D&D club, and I was met by a DM called Austin. Austin was a jacked-up guy who studied psychology and liked to bodybuild. And with all the players gathered in the room, we had a session of D&D. And, for the record, the DM knows that I'm autistic. When another player named Greg started making bigoted jokes during Session 0, ranging anywhere from sexism, homophobia, or racism, and more, I would get upset and angry at it. Austin would take me to the side and slowly explain the joke over and over again until I got it, saying that my autism got in the way of my humor. And when I tried to leave, he would stop me and try to reason it out, and ask me to explain my reason. He would then deny anything, and explain to me that I just didn't get it, and that it was just all a joke for laughs. He then tried to get me to get the jokes again, and would constantly say to the other players that, well, she doesn't get social cues, so don't mind her, and would list any symptoms of autism I would show at the game, and say to the players to not be angry, and that my brain didn't function as normal. Needless to say, I didn't return for another session. Alright guys, that's going to be the end of this one. And if you noticed, I used some old audio clips that I recorded months ago and never used. So apologies if you found that a little bit weird. And if you didn't notice it, well then forget I said anything. But, as always, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and have a good one.